I want to talk about my RN career. Now, I did start out as a grad nurse at a trauma center hospital, Sacred Heart in Pensacola, Florida. And I started out during nursing school. I worked as a patient care tech on the pediatric floor. So once I graduated nursing school and passed the NCLEX, that is where the hospital put me, was on the pediatric floor. And I knew that I would not be in pediatrics forever, and so I spent about a year on the pediatric floor, and then I went on to med-surg. Now, I spent probably a total of 2.5 to 3 years in a hospital, between two different hospitals. However, I knew that that environment was not for me. Y'all, the older nurses there, the nurses that had been there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years were chewing us up and spitting us out. There was no compassion. There was no teaching. Nursing school teaches you the book stuff. And when you're studying for a nursing license, the scenarios in the textbooks and the questions on your NCLEX are based on a perfect world scenario. And so when you get out into the real world, a lot of that doesn't apply, because we don't live in a perfect world. No hospital is perfect. And as a new grad, I was given 7 patients. With pediatrics, there's a lot of calculation with the dosage. I would ask a nurse to come in behind me and double check my calculations, and it was pulling teeth. It was like, how dare I bother them? But I wanted to be safe. I didn't want to make a mistake. And as a new grad nurse, I wanted somebody to check in behind me. And then when I moved onto a med-surg floor and was working with adults, there were some procedures that I had not yet done, on my own. And, I worked on a step-down unit for a little bit. And one of my patients, now again, every time I moved into a new area of nursing, they expected me to take a full load of patients and know exactly what I'm doing. You can't go from pediatrics to a step-down unit, and a step-down unit is kind of between med-surg and ICU. So usually when somebody comes out of ICU, they go to a step-down unit before they go to a med-surg floor. And so I had a patient with a FEMSTOP. Well, studying it in school is one thing, but when you get out into a real-world scenario where the FEMSTOPs have to be checked ever so often, and I want to say it was like every 2 to 4 hours, and I had a 7-patient caseload on a step-down unit, and one of them had stents put in, had a heart cath, had stents put in, and I was not aware of their hospital policy. So what the what do they call it? The standard is, the nursing standard, as far as checking things like a FEMSTOP. But some hospitals are stricter than that. And even to ask somebody and double check, hey, can you come with me to check this FEMSTOP, make sure, and what that is it was a compression device that was put on somebody's femoral artery after a heart cath. And so to check those, you go and check them every couple of hours to 4 hours, and make sure that they're not hemorrhaging, because that is an artery, and if you start bleeding out, that there's a problem. So it was a scary patient for me to have as a new grad, and I just remember it being so cliquish and a hostile work environment, really. I had the worst schedules. It seemed like every holiday I was expected to work, even if I had worked that same holiday the year prior. It was I just felt bullied. Every time I had to go into work, I felt bullied. And it got to the point where I would sit in my car and contemplate quitting every single day. And I eventually moved out of hospital nursing and I went into home health nursing. Absolutely loved it, y'all. It's a lot of autonomy where you don't have somebody looking over your shoulder all the time. There is a lot of driving depending on what area you live in. If you live in the city, if you live in the country. But even that, after 3 or 4 years, it started changing, and it was changing quickly. Just like the hospital CEOs, the CEOs of these home health companies, it's all about that bottom line. They do reimburse you for mileage. However, it doesn't cover the amount of gas that you use to do that job. And they like to say, well, it's the national average. Well, it doesn't cover it. So you're putting gas in your own car to work for someone else, and they might pay back half of it or 3/4 of it. I think I had a 32 patient caseload with an LPN, a PT, and an OT on my team. So I supervise those. The RNs in home health, you do the admission visits, you do the recertification visits, you do resumption of care visits. If a patient has to go into the hospital and then they come home, then you go into the home and do what's called a resumption of care to check for any changes in medication and that sort of thing. And then you also do the discharge visits. Now, with that being said, if there is a regular visit that needs to be done and there's no one available, you're expected to do that too. If you were expected to see a certain number of patients during the day, and if you didn't meet that, then they would often call you and send you outside of your area. And my breaking point was I was down in Sandestin seeing patients out that way, and was at my last patient's home and was about to head home for the day, and then I get a call from the office and they wanted me to go to Milton to do an admission. Now, like I said, they pay you mileage. They pay you mileage, and they pay you by the visit. Whatever type of visit it is, you get paid per visit. So your time, they didn't consider your time. And so I put the address in my GPS. Now, if you're going from Sandestin, which is on Highway 98, and this was during the summertime, which you cannot get from Fort Walton to Destin in 30 minutes, much less from Sandestin to Milton. And I put it in my GPS. It was going to take me 2 hours to get from Sandestin up to Milton to this patient's house. And I called the office back and I said, I can't do this visit. And they were like, well, why not? I said, because according to my GPS, it's going to take me 2 hours to get there. I said, you don't understand. I'm in Sandestin. I'm not in Crestview. I'm not in, what is that area? Holt, I think it is up there. I said, I'm way down, I'm at the beach. And, well, we don't have anybody else to do it. And I said, well, where is so-and-so? Because I knew that nurse was up there. And I said, you know what? I said, because we have RNs that work in the office. They have to have a nursing degree to be in the office in case someone calls to give a verbal order on a patient. I said, you know what? You and so-and-so are nurses. Y'all are a lot closer than I am. It would take y'all maybe 30 minutes to get there. One of y'all can go and do that visit. Well, they didn't like that answer either. And I said, well, are you going to pay me for the 2 hours that it takes to get up there? I understand I get paid for mileage, and I understand I get paid to do the visit. But what about these 2 hours that it's going to take me to drive? They didn't want to pay me for that 2 hours. So I said, I'm not doing it. And so I eventually left home health and went into hospice, and it was not a hospice house or hospice unit. This was hospice visits in the patient's homes. And y'all, that was, if I had to pick the most rewarding part of my nursing career, it was working hospice. The downside to that is you do get calls at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning when your patient is passing, and if you are the nurse on call, then you have to go out. However, the patients themselves, before they passed, were so appreciative of everything that you did, that I did. The families were amazing. They were very appreciative, and welcomed me into their home. And I had some patients that even after their family member died, you know, they would call the office and check up on me and stuff. That was very rewarding. However, again, you've got the whole gas mileage thing going on, and it works the same as home health because of all the driving, and you still have the caseloads and all of that. I did go back into home health with a different company as office personnel. So I was a clinical team lead. I worked in the office, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. After about a year and a half or 2 years doing that, this company wanted to create a team of people to basically be scrubbers. And what a scrubber is you review patient charts, and you make sure that all of the physician's signatures are where they need to be, all of the admission paperwork is in order. You review the clinician's charting and make sure that everything is cohesive and they're not contradicting themselves in their documentation. We also did medical coding, and I am not a certified documentation specialist. I am not a certified coder, but they did put us through training, and that's what I did for an additional 2 years. So I left the office and was working from home. Then the same company who created those positions decided they were going to outsource it overseas to India. And so 120 of us were suddenly without jobs. And so now I work for the state, which is easy work. It's basically the same thing. I review medical documents, and I look for upcoding and things like that. So I work for work in the Medicaid department, and so we look for Medicaid fraud, we look for upcoding and things like that. So it's basically the same work that I was doing. But y'all, I am almost 57 years old, and I'm tired. In nursing, you have no, there's no union. You're changing jobs so often, it's really hard to keep up with your retirement and to remember to switch everything over. And honestly, as an RN, I think RNs in 2026 should be making 6 figures, and that's just my opinion. You can make, if you're thinking about quitting nursing, you know, leaving the hospital setting, I don't blame you. It's hard. It is not what it used to be. The hostile work environment is real. I think I mentioned trying to create a union one time, and I was pretty much told that I would be fired if I said anything again. They illegally give you more patients than you can, legally you're supposed to have, and they will come up with some way of covering their behinds. They always did. They didn't care if you had to stay late to complete your documentation because they gave you too many patients. At both of the hospitals that I worked at, you were expected to clock out on time, and you had to sit there and document on your own time, even though you were so busy. They had you so overloaded that you could not document within those 12 hours. So I don't blame you for leaving. And I've heard a lot of stories about physical abuse and things like that. My issue was the bullying and the overloading and the stress and the dread every day of going into work. But there are other things that you can do with your RN license, y'all. So if you're thinking about leaving the bedside, put your mental health and your physical health first. Go ahead and put in your notice. You can do other things. While I do work for the state, I am considering and really looking into becoming certified in a certified clinical documentation specialist and a certified professional coder. With either one or both of those certifications plus your RN degree, you're going to be able to make a heck of a lot more money than you ever made in a hospital. I think when I left my previous position, I was making $72,000 a year working from home. Now I'm at the state making about $6,000 less than that. And so I'm going to get these 2 certifications. My husband and I want to be able to retire. However, I didn't go to nursing school until I was 35, graduated nursing school at 37. So I don't have retirement to speak of. So I want to, and I'm tired of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Y'all, I may be only 57 years old, but I got a lot of miles on me and I'm tired. And I don't want to work until I'm 70. Neither does my husband. However, my game plan is to work from home for as long as I want to. You can make as much. I know somebody that is a certified clinical documentation specialist here in my home, in the area where I live, and she makes $130,000 a year. She is a registered nurse with a certification for that. Now again, it's going to depend on who you work for, but it is a remote position and they pay really well. You can also go into legal nurse consulting if you like the idea of being called as a expert witness. Now, I don't want to have to dress up and go into court and be a witness, so I'm not going to go into that field, but it does pay well. There are so many things that you guys can do with that RN license, so don't put yourself in a box. Look into the different areas of nursing that you can go into where you can have a peace of mind, you can make better money, and actually enjoy your life. So that is where I'm at with my RN degree, and I'm about to take it into a different direction. And so there you go. Let me know down in the comments which direction you're going to go in. You don't have to leave the field of nursing altogether. You use it to your advantage. You worked hard for that RN license, so use it to your advantage. Keep it, add some certifications to it, and just kind of go in a different direction with it instead of bedside care. All right, y'all. I will see you on the next one. Bye.